Yeah, Glenn, you know, when you're talking water resources, this picture behind me here at Hoover Dam is not a good one. You should be seeing a lot more water in this reservoir.
NASA recently released new photos that show the drastic water levels of Lake Mead, which have reached a historic low.
These images provide an eye-opening illustration of the long-term drought that may be the worst in the western U.S. in 12 centuries.
This all used to be underwater, but over the past 20 years, Lake Mead has dropped more than 150 feet, and the water just keeps on going down.
Next to, what do you think the market's going to do? The second most question I'm getting asked lately is, do you think Vegas is going to run out of water? In hindsight, I wish I never went down this rabbit hole because believe me, this subject is incredibly complicated. But after ridiculous amounts of research, I'm proud to present you with an incredibly comprehensive video explaining everything you could possibly need or want to know about Lake Mead, Hoover Dam, and how this unavoidable water shortage is definitely going to affect the entire Southwest. Now, to understand where we're currently at and what our options are, we need to understand a little bit of history. So first, I'm going to walk you through how this was all created. You need to understand the legal state agreements in place and why they were instituted. Then we're going to discuss our current situation before discussing the multiple ways to possibly rectify this massive problem. First, let's establish a historical background because so much of what we're currently dealing with was actually established 100 years ago. Now, geographically, Las Vegas is located in the Mojave Desert. But because we're basically sitting in a bowl surrounded by mountains such as the Sierra Nevadas, ocean and residual moisture is obstructed from reaching us. Now, Vegas was officially founded in 1905 and then incorporated in 1911. By 1931, Nevada had 94,000 people living in the entire state. This made us the least populous state in the entire country. But that same year, we legalized gambling and began building the Hoover Dam. But here's where we got completely screwed. 10 years prior, in 1920, 7 states, California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, agreed to the Colorado River Compact. That wasn't even 7. But this compact divided control of the river as such. Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, and New Mexico received half of the water. Meanwhile, California, Arizona, and Nevada received the other half. Not to mention, Mexico received 10% of the water rights right off the top before the United States even began divvying it up amongst the states. Now, the biggest concern back then was the expanding population in the American Southwest, mostly Los Angeles and San Diego, Phoenix and Tucson. At the time, Vegas only had 3,000 residents compared to 2.2 million residents now. Worse, at the time, they estimated that the average flow of water would be 17.5 million acre feet of water per year. Their study was based off of the past 30 years of records going back into the 1890s. Ironically, the only records they had at the time happened to coincide with the wettest period in the region for the past 5 to 12 centuries. So between completely inaccurate weather prediction and Las Vegas essentially being the population of a current high school, California wound up receiving 59% of the lower basin's half, while Arizona was allocated 37%. Meanwhile, Nevada received a paltry 4%. So out of the 7 states, we only received 2% of the water rights. Meanwhile, Vegas in the 60s overtook Reno with 64,000 residents. It doubled in the 70s, and by the end of the century, Las Vegas became the most populous city that had been founded basically within the same century. So while we currently have 18% of the population that relies on the water rights, we're technically only allocated 2%. Not exactly a fair ratio, right? Now that we covered the legal history, let's discuss how this actually operates. melting snowfall descends down the Colorado River and into Lake Powell in Utah. There, we have the Glen Canyon Dam, which provides electricity. Through that dam, the water continues to flow into Lake Mead, which in return powers Hoover Dam. Now, Lake Mead is 1.5 million acres of land, making it larger than the state of Delaware, and is regulated by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. Now, Hoover Dam supplies 1 million people with electricity. Now, in 1971, we built an intake valve into Lake Mead to supply water to Las Vegas. By 1983, the lake had actually reached its peak level of all time at 1,226 feet. So we were looking pretty flush at that point. But by 2000, that pipe was rendered inoperable. So we built a second pipe. As the drought continued, we built a third pipe called the Third Straw in 2015. This time we went all in. Instead of just a pipe, we built a 3-mile tunnel 600 feet below, making the intake valve pull from only 895 feet. This was supposed to future-proof everything, but did it? Well, recently we've had some substantial rainfall, which helps, but we're currently sitting at only 1,049 feet. Remember the Bureau of Reclamation? Well, these guys become increasingly important as we continue. We've now lost 185 feet of depth since 2000. That's essentially the Statue of Liberty plus 34 feet for comparison's sake. In other words, Lake Mead is only 27% full now. Because of this, the Bureau of Reclamation created a tier system for water restrictions. Last year, we went from Tier 1 to Tier 2. This triggered when the water level dipped below 1,050 feet. Now, Tier 3 is triggered when the water level dips below 1,038 feet. Since we're only 11 feet away from that mark, it's estimated that we'll hit that mark by July of next year. At this point, California starts losing a lot of water. Even more ominous is the fact that there isn't even a Tier 4 at all. Hoover Dam has 17 turbines, but currently they can only operate at 33%. Now, if we drop to 950 feet, the older turbines will stop generating power completely. Once we reach 895 feet, that's considered deadpool, and essentially it's game over for multiple reasons. Now, remember Lake Powell and the Glen Canyon Dam from earlier? While Lake Powell is drying up as well, it turns out that Lake Mead could be suffering because of issues with the Glen Canyon Dam not providing us with the full water supply that it should. Now, they want Congress to fund a study that should have been done actually like 5 years ago. They either want to widen or drill additional tubes to increase the water flow, or simply construct new bypass tunnels to increase the water level. Now, Lake Powell is 45 feet away from major water supply levels for 30 million people completely going away. This leads to an interesting conspiracy theory that essentially the government is deliberately obstructing water from flowing down to Lake Mead. Sounds kind of crazy, right?
Master Yoda, do you think it will really come to war?
Because of these extreme conditions, the Bureau of Reclamation has given the 7 states until August 15th to come up with their own plan for reducing water consumption. This is where everything really gets complicated. The good news here is that Las Vegas is one of the most water efficient cities in the entire world, and getting better and better with newer regulations, such as removing non-functional grass from the entire city.
Rolling up the green carpet does make a difference. Watering 1 square foot of grass in Las Vegas uses 73 gallons of water per year. Drought-tolerant landscaping uses just 18 gallons. The Water Authority says banning non-functional grass will save nearly 10 billion gallons of water, 10% of southern Nevada's total water supply.
But here's the breakdown. Nevada is allocated 300,000 acre-feet of water compared to 4.4 million for California. But if the water is returned back to Lake Mead, it doesn't actually count against it. So in essence, we're allowed a net usage of 300,000. Well, Lake Mead supplies 90% of Las Vegas's fresh water supply. Despite adding 750,000 residents since the year 2000, we've actually managed to cut our consumption down by 26%. So currently, we actually draw 445,000 acre-feet of water per year. But we recycle every last drop of water that's used indoors. You could literally turn on every faucet and shower in Las Vegas, and essentially it would be cleaned and returned right back into the system. Now, as a result, we actually return 220,000 acre-feet of water right back into Lake Mead. So while we're allocated 300,000 acre-feet of water, we technically only used 75% of our tiny little allocation anyways. When we dropped to tier 2, we were cut down to 279,000, but that's still well below what we even need. Now, back to the Bureau and that conspiracy theory I talked about earlier. See, the way the Bureau of Reclamation works is this. Rather than assess the water levels of the Colorado River, Blue Mesa, Flaming Gorge, and Lake Powell, all water restrictions are predicated solely on the water levels at Lake Mead. So the quicker Lake Mead dries up, the more power the Bureau of Reclamation has to enforce water restrictions. So what happens next before we figure out some long-term solutions? 75% of the water actually goes towards agriculture, including irrigating crops like alfalfa and hay, according to The Guardian. Now, this would also affect 40% of Arizona's farmland. This would increase cattle feed prices and therefore increase the price for meat and dairy, along with kale and lettuce that's grown in Yuma, Arizona. California supplies 2/3 of the country's fruit and nuts, along with 1/3 of the country's vegetable supply. California has already started removing almond trees due to their high levels of water usage. Now, already in Nuevo Leon, down in Mexico, they're water rationed to only 3 hours of water per day, since the delta of the Colorado River, where it ends in Mexico, is bone dry now. If you want to go just full apocalyptic rabbit hole, look up the Salton Sea in California. Like Lake Mead, this was a massive aqueduct in the 1900s. It dried up, but towards the end, the water became polluted from salt and all the toxins from agricultural runoff that were now heavily concentrated and rendered the lake water too caustic to even survive. The entire surrounding city became a ghost town overnight. So yeah, basically we're in a pretty bad spot. So what solutions do we have to rectify this problem? Let's look at 3 potential solutions here. Let's look at my failure of an idea first. Now, my initial solution was to simply build desalination plants across California. I mean, Israel has been doing this since 1965 and fully adopted this method during the early 2000s. So why doesn't California just do the exact same thing as Israel? Well, as you'll see with most solutions, it boils down to politics and government. While we all love our democracy, the downside is bureaucracy. Frankly, this governmental bureaucracy is what will ultimately be our demise. A couple years ago, California proposed building a desalination plant in Huntington Beach. Now, the cost was $1.4 billion, and even Governor Gavin Newsom endorsed the project. Now, ironically, who would have thought that Newsom wasn't liberal enough here? Because last year, in a stunning surprise, the California Coastal Commission voted to kill the project. Based on studies from UCLA and others, they determined that each gallon of water produced would produce 1 gallon of salty brine as a byproduct, which would then settle on the ocean floor. This would kill about 421 acres of marine life. As a result, the commission rejected it, saying there has to be a better solution, although they failed to offer one. Now, I'm not saying let's go around clubbing baby seals over here, but we humans need to find a way to survive as well. So what's a better solution, California? Well, arguably the most ambitious plan of them all is building a pipeline from the Great Lakes directly to the southwest. Now, right off the cuff, this sounds pretty batshit crazy, right? But then again, we do have a history of batshit crazy ideas that also worked. We managed to build the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline in 2 years back in the mid-70s. Los Angeles built the Colorado River Aqueduct to bring water directly to the city in 1933.
Whitsit Weymouth, Matthews, Deemer. These metropolitan pioneers would soon start the largest water project in history.
So, is this really a crazy idea or simply ambitious? Let's unpack this. First off, the Great Lakes contain 21% of all surface freshwater on Earth, enough to cover the entire United States under 9 feet of water. Now, here's where government screws us yet again. In 2008, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, and the provinces of Ontario and Quebec entered into an agreement called the Great Lakes Compact. Now, this created legal means to manage and govern the water and distribution of the Great Lakes. This also contained very strong language for additional diversions to the water. For any deviations to this agreement to be approved, all 9 states and provinces would have to vote to approve this. Currently, both Democrats and Republicans are against this idea. Now, let's just say by some miracle our politicians did something besides line their own pockets for a change. What would it take to actually construct this? Well, this would likely be the single largest industrial project in the history of America, spanning 1,500 miles. The best example we have is the Colorado River Aqueduct to Los Angeles. This was only 242 miles long and built for $220 million back in 1933. In today's dollars, that's about $5 billion. Now, multiply that by 1,500 miles, and you come up with 31 billion. But between land rights crossing the Rocky Mountains and unions, we're realistically looking at $100 billion. Now, the best modern example is actually in China. They're currently building the South to North Water Project that started in 2003. The longest part of this project is only 750 miles long, half. Now, 11 years into the project, the costs were already projected at $79 billion. Keep in mind, this is China, where they build bridges in as little as 43 hours. In America, we can't even build a bridge in 43 weeks. Even China doesn't expect this project to be completed until 2050. So realistically, this isn't a feasible short-term solution. The last idea comes in the form of 3 derivations, similar to the Great Lakes idea. The first comes from Arizona, where they're lobbying Congress to consider diverting water from the Mississippi River up to the Green River, which then flows into the Colorado River down into Lake Powell. Now, a similar idea is to have the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers build an aqueduct from the old river control structure down in Louisiana directly over to Lake Powell. 4.5 million gallons a second pass through old river control structure currently, and we could divert 250,000 gallons right over to Lake Powell. Not only would this fill up Lake Powell in 254 days, but this would also reduce flooding in New Orleans at the exact same time. So, this effectively is a win-win situation, right? After Lake Powell fills, Lake Mead would take 370 days to fill itself. Once the aqueduct is complete, it would take a total of 20 months to fill up both Lake Mead and Lake Powell. Now, the problem with both these options are this. First, it takes a tremendous amount of energy physically to move the weight of all of that water west. Second, connecting rivers also changes the ecosystems. Even the Colorado River Aqueduct has an issue with shellfish, damaging the water-moving equipment. They have to shut down for 2 weeks a year just to dry out and clean right now. So you can just imagine the environmental group protest that would occur if this project got off the ground. So in the end, we do have solutions. Unfortunately, our government and society as a whole tends to be reactive instead of proactive. Now that our backs are against the wall, we're going to have some major decisions to make in the forthcoming years. Now, for me, the main question isn't whether we'll figure this out or not, but rather what happens in the meantime. Las Vegas has created a blueprint for water conservation. Clearly, other states will soon be forced to emulate our blueprints. And while we only need a tiny percentage of water from Lake Mead to survive as a city, 4% of 0 is still 0. Our only hope for the moment is to simply force other states to reduce the amount of water they draw from Lake Mead so we can at least maintain a safe level of water until a viable long-term solution is constructed. In the meantime, we may find ourselves losing more golf courses, rendering all forms of grass illegal, and even losing swimming pools since we can't recover that water back like we do with indoor water. Well, I hope you enjoyed this comprehensive video. Please help me out by liking this video, share it with your family and friends, and be sure to subscribe to this channel. I really would appreciate it. Now, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Deuces.